Storytelling, it's just what we do as humans, right? It's how we connect with each other, how we persuade, how we make sense of this crazy world. But what happens when a machine, an AI like ChatGPT tries to do it? Can it actually spin a yarn that not only grabs our attention, but, genuinely moves us, and maybe even changes our minds?
Hey, hello, and welcome. Today we're kicking off a Flow Tao Salon, where we do a real deep dive into some fascinating research, and we're going to unpack one of the very first academic studies that asks a huge question. Can an AI actually be a persuasive storyteller? So let's get right into it.
Okay, so the paper we're digging into today is a preprint from some really smart folks. Haoran at the University of Florida and Sixiao Liu at the University of Pennsylvania. The title says it all. Can AI tell good stories? Narrative Transportation and Persuasion with ChatGPT. And trust me, the way they set up their experiments to figure this out is just brilliant.
So what's the big question they're really chasing here? It's a huge one. Can a story generated by AI actually pull you in, transport you to another world, and be just as persuasive as a story written by a person? Basically, can a machine ever become a master storyteller?
So how do they test this? Well, their method was super clever. First, they took some human-written stories that were already used in other studies. Then, they had ChatGPT write new stories about the same exact topics. They ran 3 different experiments with more than 1,000 people. And here's the kicker, the really smart part. They mixed up the labels. Sometimes they tell people an AI story was written by a human, or a human story was from an AI, all to see how our expectations mess with our experience.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with this whole idea of a machine telling a story and the biases we have. Then, we'll get into the main event, the human versus AI showdown. After that, we'll uncover the AI's secret weapon. It's a good one. And finally, we'll land on the 3 biggest takeaways from this whole investigation.
First up, let's talk about the bias against the bot. Because before we can even judge the stories themselves, we've got to look at the baggage we bring with us, right? All our preconceived ideas about what AI can and can't do creatively. So let me just ask you, quick gut check, be honest. If you knew, right up front, that the story you were about to read was written by an AI, would you judge it a little differently? Would you maybe be looking for mistakes or for it to sound a little robotic? This is exactly what the researchers were curious about.
And this brings us to this core conflict between perception and reality. When we're told a story is from a human writer, we just naturally expect creativity, emotion, nuance, right? But when that same story is labeled as coming from ChatGPT, our expectations totally shift. We start bracing for something formulaic, maybe a little empty or soulless. So the real question is, does that simple label change everything?
Well, the answer is a huge, resounding yes. The data they collected is so clear. This labeling effect is totally real. When people thought a story was from an AI, get this, even when it was actually written by a human, they consistently said they felt less engaged, less lost in the story, and, maybe more importantly, they argued with it more in their own heads. Our own bias is a massive filter. Okay, so we know the label matters. A lot. But what happens when we just throw the labels out the window? Let's get to the showdown. Let's see how the stories actually perform when you just compare them text to text.
So the first experiment was pretty simple. A story about a character and his dog, nothing too controversial. And the results? They were kind of weird. The human story was a little bit more engaging, you could say. But, and this is a big but, people actually argued less with the ChatGPT story. And they even said they liked the characters the AI created more. That was the first clue that something really unexpected was happening here.
Then for the second study, they upped the difficulty. This was a complex, persuasive story about the societal causes of obesity. And here, the human writer won, no question. The human story was way more engaging, more persuasive. Now, the researchers think this might be because ChatGPT was asked to adapt an existing complex story, which might have kind of handcuffed its ability to be creative. So it shows the context really matters.
But just when you think you've got it figured out, along comes study 3. This time, a persuasive story about preventing skin cancer. And what happens? The AI fights back. Just like we saw in that first study, the story written by ChatGPT led to way less counterarguing from readers. That same pattern popped up again. It seems like people just lower their guard when they're reading the AI's writing. But why?
And that question, that why, brings us to my favorite part of this whole thing, the AI's secret weapon. This is where we uncover ChatGPT's most surprising, most counterintuitive, and maybe most powerful advantage when it comes to persuasion.
So first, let's make sure we're on the same page about this term counter-arguing. You know that little voice in your head? The one that pops up when you're reading something and goes, wait a minute, I'm not so sure about that. Or, yeah, but what about this? That's counter-arguing. It's like our built-in mental shield that protects us from being persuaded too easily.
And this chart just lays it all out crystal clear. When the researchers combined the data from all 3 studies, the result was just undeniable. Look at that. On average, the human-written stories sparked more of that counter-arguing. Meanwhile, the ChatGPT stories consistently triggered less of it. The AI's message was somehow sneaking right past that mental shield.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. This isn't just an interpretation. It's a direct quote from their overall analysis of all 3 studies. ChatGPT-generated narratives generated lower counter-arguing than the human-authored ones. It wasn't a one-off thing. It was a consistent, measurable effect.
So, why? Why is this happening? The researchers have this amazing theory that they call the beauty in averageness effect. The basic idea is that ChatGPT, since it's trained on pretty much the entire internet, produces writing that is, well, it's kind of average. It's not super dramatic or poetic. It just reflects the most common way things are said. And that very commonness, that lack of a strong, flashy author's voice might be the key. It's less triggering. It's so plain that our brains don't feel the need to push back against it.
Okay, so now that we've walked through all the evidence, let's just boil it all down. What does this all tell us? Let's pull it together into 3 key takeaways about the future of storytelling. Takeaway number 1. The bias is real. A really big deal, actually. We humans just seem to be hardwired to be skeptical of creativity when it comes from a machine. This labeling effect is a powerful, measurable force, and it's a huge hurdle that AI will have to overcome, no matter how good it gets.
Number 2, context is king. ChatGPT isn't some magic wand that's always good or always bad. Its performance completely depends on the job you give it. We saw it do really well with a simple, open-ended prompt, but it fell flat when it had to tackle a super complex existing story. Basically, what you get out of it is directly related to what you put into it.
And finally, the third, and for me, the most mind-bending takeaway of all, average can be incredibly persuasive. The AI's biggest weakness, that kind of generic, less exciting writing style, might actually be its greatest secret strength. By not being so in-your-face with its style, it can slide right past our mental defenses and deliver its message without a fight. It's wild. Its blandness is its superpower. And that just leaves us with this one last, pretty provocative question to chew on. We have always believed that the storyteller, their unique voice, their humanity is everything. But if an average story written by a machine can actually change our minds more effectively, does it even matter who or what is telling the story anymore? That's a question I think we're all going to be dealing with for a long time to come.